Hi there everybody, welcome to another video. On today's video I have this VW Golf. This is a 2012 model. I'm gonna be changing the oil filter, gonna check the coolant level and the percentage of antifreeze, gonna top up some screen wash fluid, and also I'm gonna check the air filter. I'm not gonna be replacing it, but I'm gonna check if it's clean or not, if it needs replacing. Also, I will be removing the oil filter, but I will not be changing it in this occasion. This car was serviced last year at 44,000 miles. It's got 45,000 miles at the moment, so I'm just going to change the oil, but I will remove the oil filter in order to drain all the oil. But I will be refitting the same oil filter, and at the same time I'll show you how to remove it and how to refit it. So to start, we need to open the bonnet, and I'm just running the car at the moment for a few minutes just to get the engine warm, and so we can drain the oil a little bit easier. So I'll run it for about 15 minutes. That should be enough, and then we can start the procedure. But anyway, once you open the bonnet from there, then you need to open it right here. Press this, I'll show you, and then lift that up. So it's this here. Here's our engine. Is the TSI petrol. This is a 1.4, and it takes, we're going to use 5W30, and here I have the oil filter, which is a genuine one. So anyway, we'll let the car warm up, and then we'll start the service. Okay. To remove the oil filter, you're going to need one of these, and the size of this particular one, it's a 76 by 14. And you're going to need one of these as well. This is a 19 mil socket with a ratchet that I have to drain the oil from underneath. So these two are for the oil service. Now I'm going to top up some screen wash fluid. Use the proper screen wash fluid, because otherwise, especially in winter, if you only put water in there, that water may freeze. Because yes, as I was saying, if you put only water, maybe in winter, if the temperatures are minus, that water freezes. It also expands. It can damage your tank, amongst other things, but you won't get any water coming out the jets for your windscreen. So to use the proper fluid, is cheap enough. You can buy it ready mixed from any shop and pour it in there. Hopefully pour it in the correct place and not all over the engine. Okay, that is nice and full and ready for winter. Really, you ought to keep this topped up every week or so. It depends how much you drive, obviously, and how much you use it. Especially if you're on a motorway, you tend to use quite a bit of it. But if you're not using it regularly, then it's going to be fairly full. Next, we're going to check the coolant. The coolant is in this tank here. Obviously I warmed up the engine, but it's not really hot. It's not at running temperature. If it was a running temperature, that could be very hot, so be very aware of that if you're opening this cap. So at the moment I can safely open it, because the engine, it's fairly cold. It's not really hot. Anyway, if you were to open it when the engine was hot, if you do it slowly, you can release the pressure. I always open it while pushing this on here slowly, and you hear the pressure released. In this case, it's okay because it hasn't run that much, as I said. So coolant will be there. It's sort of orangey color. I'm gonna use this gadget here to check the percentage of the antifreeze. So let me suck off that some of that fluid. Right, so this little gadget here is showing us minus 21 or 22 there, and that means the percentage of antifreeze that I have here is at that sort of temperature, which means it would have to be minus 25 degrees for this to freeze. So this is a good level to have, and I'm happy with that. We can pull that back, the liquid back in. One thing I forgot, with this gadget you can also check the fluid, how clear it is, and if it's obviously contaminated with any oil or anything like that. In this case scenario, it's quite clean, and you can also see sort of orangey of color. So with other cars, different cars have different color antifreeze, blue, green and whatnot. So I am happy with that temperature, and now we can have a look at the level of it. So I'm just gonna shine a light in there, that helps matters. And you really have to look on the side here. In there you can see a mark for minimum, and the other line that's just above that is the mark for the max. So this fluid at the minute, it's right on the max line. So again, that's a good level, and I'm happy with that. And that's how you can check it. So now we can move on from that. Just close this cap. Just make sure it closes. You don't need to force it, it just closes, and then that's it. Right, now let's move on to check the condition of the air filter. If you have to change it, then you can go ahead and change it. It's sitting in this container here. We're gonna open that, some Phillips screws there. Nice and clean. If you have to take it out, take that screw there. Remove these from there and take the filter out. So that filter doesn't need replacing, but let's have a look at the number. This is a Malay LX 1566. That is the air filter fitted there. So then you would get your new filter and put it in there, pretty much the way it came out. Get that back in there. And that is done. Make sure not to over tighten these little screws because they're only going into plastic. That's it. So far fairly simple. Now we're gonna move on to the oil and the oil filter. So to start, I'm gonna pull the dipstick open And also I'm going to open the oil filler cap, but I'm gonna leave it sitting there like so. And we're gonna put the wrench to remove the filter, and then we can use our ratchet to remove the filter. So I'm just gonna loosen it a little bit, but what I've done, I actually put a piece of paper here, just a bit of paper like this, on top of the alternator, where it's sitting just under the filter. And that's because sometimes when you open this filter, although once you allow air into there, that oil drains. There is oil in the filter and the oil will drain down. However, sometimes a little bit of it drips on top of the alternator. And just to avoid a messy alternator, we can put that bit of paper in case any oil drips, then it drips on your paper. So we can slowly open the filter. This little cup sometimes gets a bit stuck, but we'll remove it. There we are. So you may have noticed a little bit of oil dripped, but that's why we have that bit of paper there to catch the oil. So let's clean this surface as well, make sure it's nice and clean. So I'm gonna be reusing my filter here, and that's the part number there, 03C115561H. That's the one that particularly fits this engine size, this engine model. So make sure you get the correct filter, because they are different for different engine sizes, and maybe the year of the car. Even though the engine looks the same, it might be slightly different. And another thing to note is that sometimes this part of the filter, this rubber, there is a rubber here, sometimes that rubber remains in there, and if you don't realize it, when you try to fit the new filter, even though you might be able to do so, you're gonna force it in, and you don't want that. So make sure that this bit of rubber here, it's with the filter, it's come out. So anyway, I'm gonna be reusing my filter, as I said, so I'm gonna leave it there for now. And now, if you're working outside, I would recommend covering this area with something like a bit of paper or so. I'm not particularly, but I'm just showing you, just to avoid any dirt or anything going in there. And now I'm gonna get the car up and we can drain the oil from underneath. Right, looking at the car from underneath, the sump is sitting right here next to the exhaust, and there's our 19mm bolt we want to open. Make sure you have something to catch the oil, and let's crack this open. Okay. Sometimes these ones you can undo it a little bit by hand, and then the rest you have to do it with a wrench, and then you have to do it by hand again. This time it seems to be okay doing it by hand. One thing to remember, if the engine's been running a lot, this oil can also be very hot and you can also burn yourself, so remember that. In this case scenario, again, this is not that hot. Let's just run the engine a little bit. So now we can let that drain, and in the meantime I'm gonna clean this and put a new copper washer. New copper washer here, The copper washer size that I'm using is that there, size 14 by 20 by 1.5 millimeters. So I usually buy a bunch of them, so I have lots of those, and that is ready to be fitted. So I'm just waiting for the oil to drain and then we can continue. Right, I'm gonna fit my sun plug bolt back in now, and we ought to tighten this to 30, between 30 and 35 Newton meters, but I'm not using a torque wrench right now. However, if you're not used to, obviously if you're not doing this all the time, it's a good idea to have a torque wrench so you know exactly how much you're tightening it, so you don't damage anything. The last thing you want to do is damage the thread on the sump, because then if you damage it on the sump, you have to replace the sump, and that is drama. So just be careful with that. If you haven't got a torque wrench, then when this is tight, when you feel is closed, just give it an extra, I don't know, few millimeters of pressure, and that should be enough. After all, if you check it a bit later and you see a little drip like this, then you may know that it needs a little bit more tightening. Obviously this drip is from what we drained the oil just now, but just showing you as an example. But what we do want to do is clean that, make sure there's nothing there, so that way you can monitor that next time. So that is done. Now I'm gonna lower the car, put some oil in, and our filter. Right, let's get our oil filter back in there. I would recommend putting a little bit of oil around the seal here, or multi-purpose grease. This one already has some, so then we can go ahead and fit our filter in there. In my case, the used one. You can use a brand new one and just tighten that by hand, and that is that. Now we can put some oil in there. Now I have a list here, depending on the engine size that you have. Obviously this is a petrol engine, and if you need to find out how many kilowatts your engine is. This particular one is the 90 kilowatt TSI petrol engine, and it takes 3.6 liters of oil, including an oil filter change. So obviously I'm not changing the oil filter, but I have removed it to drain the oil from it. So if you left the filter in there, those filters retain the oil, and it's about 200 mil or so. So anyway, I got the 90 kilowatt TSI, which is 3.6 liters. The 118 is the same amount, but then we have obviously the other ones, 3.2, 4.5 and whatnot. So make sure you know what engine you have, what kilowatt. Check your manual or do some online research. But now I'm gonna top up some oil. Oil goes in there. It takes a little while to do it. You have to be really patient when putting your oil in there. I'm gonna be using some Mobile Super 3000 5W30. So again, check your manual, and it's gonna give you like a part number recommended for your car. This one is, you can see there, it's kind of recommended for VW, Porsche and whatnot. So it's up to you what oil you want to use. You can use Castrol or whatever. If you regularly service the car, it's not really an issue. Right, so I'm gonna top up the oil, and we'll see you once I finish that. So just to show you, oil goes in here. You have to be a little bit patient, because has to be poured in quite slowly, otherwise it starts coming out the sides, like something like this. Right, anyway, so I'll do that. Okay, once you finish putting the oil in there, close that oil filler cap, and you could check the your dipstick. Let me just clean that. Right, I just cleaned the dipstick. Now in this dipstick, this side here is the minimum and this side here is the maximum. So I'm gonna put this dipstick in there, and we aim it to be obviously at the max. Possibly it's going to be a little bit higher than max, because once you run the engine, obviously some of that oil will stay in the oil filter, as we already discussed, which means when you check the dipstick again, it's gonna be showing a bit lower. Right, so all the shiny part here is got oil, which means my oil is actually somewhere up here. I can just about see the shiny part, even though it looks shiny here as well, but the real bit that is I'm taking as a measurement is here, because I can tell it's a bit dry here and a little bit wet here, but that's just because when the way you fit the dipstick and whatnot. So that is pretty good. That's gonna drop down a bit once you run the engine, and I'm happy with that. The other thing I was gonna mention before I forget, it's the kilowatt of the engine. As I was showing you, mine is a 90. You can find that on your registration logbook, the logbook or the registration of the car. It is written in there, the chassis, the engine size and whatnot, and also that kilowatt. So if you need that information, it's in your logbook. Right, let's get this car started. So engine started, running fine, no engine lights, no warning lights coming on. Sounds quiet and smooth. So as I was saying, smooth, quiet, and just have a quick browse. Make sure there's no oil dripping from underneath. Make sure there's no oil dripping from your filter, and happy days. So that's pretty much it. And having said that, I hope the video helps. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we'll see you everyone on the next video. So thank you for watching.